Aletheia Church family. In the Daily 5, what we've been doing is looking at encounters with Jesus that people have. And it was Resurrection Sunday a couple days ago, so we've been looking at a couple of encounters that Jesus has with people after his resurrection. And this was one of my favorite ones. An encounter Jesus has with the Apostle Peter after his resurrection. This is in the Gospel of John, chapter 21, beginning in verse 20. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one also who had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, "Lord, who is it that is going to betray you?" Now when Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" And Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." I've been nervous a good number of times in my life, but one moment of extreme nerves that comes to mind is when I was getting ready to do an entry audition for Berklee College of Music on the drums. I couldn't eat that morning. I was freaking out. And when I walked into the hallway just before my audition, the hallway was filled with other drummers getting ready to do their auditions. So here's how I tried to deal with my fear. I started to look around at each of the drummers, and almost all of them had their drumsticks out and a practice pad out, and they were doing rudiments to get their hands warmed up for the audition. Now I tried to gauge their skill level based on their rudiments and their warm-ups and try to compare myself with them in order to feel less fearful and less insecure. It did not help, needless to say. That, in a way, is what I think Peter is doing here. When he asks Jesus about John, another disciple, he says, "What about this man?" I think he is trying to deal with his insecurity and his fear. Now, why do I say that? Well, this question follows a conversation and an interaction just before it with Peter and Jesus, where Jesus basically says to Peter, even though he's betrayed him before his crucifixion, he's giving Peter a calling as a pastor of his church after his ascension. And Peter likely feels insecure because he has just betrayed Jesus in a pretty obvious way. Jesus also tells him that this calling is going to involve a lot of suffering. So Peter likely feels insecure, and he likely feels fearful. He likely feels fearful. And I think that's why he asked the question about John. He is trying through comparison to deal with his fear and his insecurity. Ever done this? Have you ever felt in a moment of insecurity and fear about the way that Jesus has called you to follow him? You find yourself comparing yourself and say, "Yeah, but what about that person? Yeah, but what about that person? They don't have to do that. They don't have to do that." It's a way to deal with your fear. Or maybe he's searching for safety in numbers. Maybe he's asking Jesus, is John going to have to suffer in a similar measure with his calling to follow you? How does Jesus respond to him? He says, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" In a sense, Jesus says, it's none of your business. Stop playing that game. Stop playing the game of dealing with your insecurity and your fear by comparing yourself to other people and pointing them out. He says, no, stop playing that game. Instead, you follow me. When Peter tries to sidestep his fear and his insecurity by pointing around and comparing himself to other people, Jesus says, stop playing that game. Focus on what it is I have called you to do. If you're following Jesus, there will be moments where fear and insecurity crop up. And the temptation will be to deal with that fear and insecurity by pointing around and looking around at other people and finding safety in numbers, or complaining and pointing out the ways in which they don't have it bad like you have it. Jesus would say to us, don't play that game. Rather, take ownership of what it is you have been called to do by Jesus. And that's exactly what I had to do with my audition at Berklee College of Music. Stop comparing myself to other people, focus in on what I was there to do. My friends, here's the great news. Jesus has called you to follow him. as a disciple. Focus on what that is. Focus on what that is today. What is it that Jesus has called you to do in following him today? If your focus is that, you're in the right space. You're in the right space. Jesus has called you to follow him. Take ownership of that. God bless you.